I feel like a lot of Palestinians in the community moderate their what I believe the correct position is. A lot of them feel like they have to moderate their opinions. If you're a Palestinian in America and you say you support Hamas, you're done. Like, they will ruin you. That's why I believe it's our job to come out in front and be allies and normalize the correct position. Don't say ridiculous nonsense like two-state solutions like that was solved in South Africa. Now, the reason why Palestinians, you'll see a lot of Palestinians say, I support a two-state solution, because if they say they support a one-state solution, they'll be labeled as a terrorist and murdered. If you've been following my work for a while, you know I've been hammering like the rise of Ziofascism really hard. And I understand that everyone goes through inherent discrimination. But to me, I am seeing this anti-Semitism psyop that's been propped up in order to implement a level of Ziofascism and authoritarian crackdowns I've never seen in my life. The UK and Germany is already gone. The UK and Germany is a full-blown Ziofascist state. This is why I've been doing a lot of conversations about this. We also will be covering a lot about what is going on in Gaza, the insane famine, and our brother Chris Moss. He was just on RBN right before he left for the flotilla. He did a show with Rome. He's been a longtime friend of RBN. He was beaten by the Israeli forces, kidnapped because he had the audacity to bring baby formula to starving Palestinian babies. So we have a lot to discuss. I want to bring our panel in before we dive into a lot of these issues. The first one we'll bring in is host of Gorilla Pod. We had him on RBN quite a few times. Very well-researched, independent citizen journalist. Thank you for joining us on RBN once again, Adnan Hussein. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. We also have Rob Lipton from Jewish Voice for Peace, very well-known activist. I appreciate you for joining us on RBN as well. Also, our friend Nurdeen Kiswami, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, founder of Within Our Lifetime and much respected Palestinian advocate and activist. So I appreciate you guys for making time with us today. As I mentioned before, I've been covering this rise of Ziofascism. I think it's one of the biggest threats that just any freedom-loving person, especially in the West, faces today. And Nurdeen, I'm glad that you were able to join us. And at RBN, we try our best to feature as many Palestinian voices as possible. It's tough though, and I don't blame them. It makes 100% sense to me because many Palestinians are afraid to have conversations on the channels because they have to deal with insane amount of retaliation. So I appreciate you for coming on. I want to ask you about that because we're in this era of Ziofascism. I want to ask you about how this has been impacting your organizing. What's your thoughts on the free speech crackdown, the anti-Semitism crackdowns on college campuses that all the bourgeoisie Ivy schools are falling for? So let's start there. We will go around the panel on that same topic, but let's start with Nurdeen first.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be here amongst you all, especially as the famine, the genocide in Gaza continues to intensify. And this is something that we need to be talking about consistently, not just raising awareness, but, demanding action, demanding accountability, and, not just having the correct ideological position, but actually raising the stakes and trying to put an end to this. And in terms of, how I've been impacted personally, I mean, I've been an activist, an organizer, for years now. We're actually this year is the 10-year anniversary of Within Our Lifetime as an organization that I founded when I was 20 years old. So this is nothing new to me. Being in New York City, the epicenter of Zionism, after the so-called State of Israel, I've always been quote unquote hunted down by Zionists, literally and figuratively, online and in person at my universities. So, it feels like what's happening to everyone else is just like, they're just catching up to my reality, to the reality that, Palestinians have been facing for decades. And, still I understand that what I'm going through is nothing compared to what my people, my family members, loved ones are going through in the West Bank, in Gaza, in refugee camps scattered across the Arab world. So, even from that perspective, I don't see myself as a victim, but as, someone who is resisting colonization in exile, right? And I use the term exile, not diaspora, because, that's, I didn't choose to leave. We've been exiled from our homeland. I was banned from Palestine for about a decade before I went back in 2023, and then that was before October. So, I imagine that I can't return until, all of Palestine is liberated from the river to the sea. And that's precisely why we have the name within our lifetime, because we believe that that's our responsibility to bring about in our times. Most Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims will tell you that we have this innate belief that one day Palestine is going to be free. I grew up with people saying like that's an inevitable reality. It's just not going to happen in our lifetime. That's what we would always hear. And so, we push back on that by saying within our lifetime. And, to truly believe and embody that, you have to act like it. You have to not be afraid or put, your career or personal goals above that of liberation, right? That is your personal goal. That is your, commitment. And that's how I've always behaved. And so, of course, that has wrought me a lot of consequences. I've had Zionist campaigns send 20,000 emails to my law school trying to expel me. I've had Zionists follow me and harass me in person on the streets of New York City. I've had my comrades and myself physically attacked by Zionists on multiple occasions. And so, none of this is new to me. If anything, it just feels like because people are seeing the devastation of what is happening in Gaza, they understand what's at stake. And so, they're finally taking that same level of sacrifice and commitment. And, they're seeing what I've always experienced and experiencing it themselves. And if anything, I feel like people are paying attention to it more now. Just a recent example, Bitar, a Zionist organization that is actually originally, when it was founded as a paramilitary youth group, brown shirt Nazis, essentially. They put a bounty on my head, offering people $1,800 to anyone that would hand me a beeper, which we know references the beeper from Lebanon. But, I'm pretty sure if that happened like 5 years ago, nobody would have paid attention to that or cared. But the fact that it's happening now, people are paying attention to it. They are talking about it. And, Zionists are going completely mask off. And as horrible as that is, I also think it's a blessing in disguise because it's showing the world the true reality of what Zionism is. It's just on us and the rest of the world to react appropriately, because if they get away with this after going mask off, then, we're ushering ourselves into an era where horrors can continue to escalate and be, live streamed on all of our phones. And, we've been giving them the green light by being complacent with it. So, it's really on us now and how we react to that.
People have no idea the sacrifices and just the dire threat that many Palestinian Americans deal with just for advocating for their own people. I feel like a lot of people don't take that seriously, that they are victims of fascist retaliation, not just physical violence, but we see the entire capitalist class go against them and target them and ruin them financially and ruin all their potential job opportunities and in their future for standing up for their people. This is why you guys see my anger, and you guys say I got my friends here, so I try to be cool. But you guys see the anger I have for liberal Zionists and people who throw Palestinians under the bus, people who undercut the demands of Palestinian people. You guys have to understand that it's our job to lead in front as allies with the demands of the Palestinians. And Nerdy, I want to ask a follow-up on this thought, because The reason why I shout and I scream from the river to the sea with my full chest, the reason why I will never in a million years condemn Hamas, in fact, I commend Hamas, I commend Palestinian resistance, is because I know, and feel free to put back on me, this is why I'm asking you about this. I feel like a lot of Palestinians in the community moderate their what I believe the correct position is. A lot of them feel like they have to moderate their opinions. If you're a Palestinian in America and you say you support Hamas, you're done. Like, they will ruin you. That's why I believe it's our job to come out in front and be allies and normalize the correct position. Don't say ridiculous nonsense like two-state solutions like that was solved in South Africa. Now, the reason why Palestinians, you see a lot of Palestinians say, I support a two-state solution, because if they say they support a one-state solution, they'll be labeled as a terrorist and murdered. So, Nerdy, I want to get your thoughts on this. Like, do you guys feel like there's massive pressure in terms of moderating the way you speak about this? There's a reason, guys, you don't see a lot of Palestinians on RBN. It's hard because there's a reason why they don't want to put their face out there. So, Nerdy, what's your thoughts on that before I go around the panel?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I grew up in a post 9/11 New York City. I've lived in New York my entire life. And, you know, everyone, we would have the same opinion on Palestine, right? Like behind closed doors, but they would just be like, you can't talk about this publicly, or you can't talk about Palestine in the MSA, the Muslim Students Association in college, or you can't talk about politics, like, because somebody's always listening, somebody's always watching. And I'm like, why? We have these rights under international law. And then also, you know, just learning about the struggles of other oppressed people. You know, I've always known, like, you know, you don't condemn an occupied or an oppressed population for how they choose to resist their oppression and their occupation. So I was just like, why doesn't this apply to us? And so, you know, I really helped usher this like idea into my community that, you know, we do have these rights. We have the right to speak about it. And if we don't stand up for ourselves, then who will? So, I mean, you know, I understand that a lot of Palestinians do face consequences for saying those sorts of things here in America, but like, we still have a lot more leeway and slack compared to the Palestinians living in Gaza and living in the West Bank, like the journalists who are accused to be members of Hamas simply just for covering, you know, the news and then being killed for that. I mean, you know, it's not like we have guns being aimed at our heads yet, not yet at least. So, you know, as long as we're still able to speak out, you know, I still even urge my community that they should speak out more than they have been. You know, I think Palestinian Americans should be speaking out more, and everyone else should as well. But, you know, like you said, for those of us who live in the belly of the beast, like, we're not going through daily checkpoints. The risk that we take, yes, you know, it's still a risk. It's not as risky as people who live directly under Israeli occupation. And so it's incumbent on us to speak out, you know, louder than anyone else. Particularly the fact that, you know, our tax dollars are going to fund this genocide, which didn't start in October 2023. It's been going on for the last 75 years. So as Americans, I think that we share the responsibility of this genocide in Palestine, you know, more than any other nation in the whole world. And so I think that's what makes it incumbent on us to speak out. And I do think a lot of Palestinians have spoken out, you know, more than before. I grew up going to Islamic school in Brooklyn my whole life. And I remember, like, there were people in my class who wouldn't even say that they're Palestinian, right? They would say like they're Lebanese or they're Jordanian because that's where their families were exiled to. That's where their families were living in the refugee camps there. Because saying that you're Palestinian, even prior to 9/11, in the U.S. New York City context, is essentially like saying, like, you know, you're a terrorist. That's how it was always like framed. Terrorism wasn't seen as a Muslim problem; it was seen as a Palestine problem. Post 9/11, you know, that changed. But you know, I always say, like, we are the post 9/11 generation, right? I ended up going to public school. You know, my last 2 years of high school, and even just growing up in New York, like, we would get called terrorists all the time. So what? You know, that doesn't scare me anymore. That's just seen as racism. That's just seen as Islamophobia. And so, you know, all the attacks and the weaponization of these terms that they used on our community for years actually backfired and backlashed against the ruling class, because now, people aren't afraid to be called these things anymore. They've been calling us that for years, and if anything, it's a negative reflection on them. And so, this is a very important time, a very important time where, like, the ideology of liberation is warring against the ideology of colonization. And, that's why they're so desperate to punish the Palestinian people by, carrying out this genocide en masse, because they showed the world that you can resist occupation. You can do it by any means necessary, and you will have the masses of the people on your side. So they're trying to exact the price on the Palestinian people, for showing the world just that, for exposing the farcity of Western liberal democracy and human rights and all of these things that, they teach us, but then don't seem to be applicable when it comes to, reality. And so, just knowing that this is such an important time, I think, makes it even more important for people to speak out. And, like, I will hold even my own people accountable, because, again, if we don't fight for ourselves the way that our family members, our loved ones are fighting in Gaza, then why would, like, the people around us, fight for us, right? Gaza has made the Palestinians in the West Bank rise up, the Palestinians in 48, the Palestinians in refugee camps, and the Palestinians in exile. And we have more slack than, any of the aforementioned, groups of Palestinian people, wherever they are, just, by living here. And I'm a naturalized citizen. I wasn't born in this country. I know that, people have immigration issues. They have family members that they worry about. But again, our homes aren't being bombed into craters. And, I just had a child 6 weeks ago, my first baby. I can't imagine the mothers who aren't able, to feed their children. So, I don't think anybody has an excuse for failing to speak up, regardless of whatever personal sacrifices they have to make.
That's very well said. This is exactly why I always try to feature Palestinian voices, even though it may be hard to have them on. I appreciate your perspective, and this is another reason why we push for mutual aid so hard. And it's embarrassing for the U.S. left that they wasted millions of dollars supporting fraudulent politicians, wasting millions of dollars on stupid projects like Justice Democrats, DSA. Can you guys just imagine? I always talk about this with Tour for the Poor. Can you imagine that $400 million we spent on the Bernie campaign was spent as a backbone to support Palestinians and other people who were financially retaliated against? We don't even have remotely the infrastructure we need because the U.S. left has been so unserious my entire life. That's why I go pretty hard at them, and a lot of people don't appreciate it. Now, I want to ask, I'll pass it to Rob and Anand. Trust me, we'll get you in here very soon. This is already a very lively conversation. We were talking about, at least in the beginning, the rise of Ziofascism. And when I was critiquing Jewish institutions, one of the core critics I have is how they even throw their own people under the bus. Like, the amount of anti-Zionist Jews that told me stories about how they was retaliated against for their beliefs. I covered how there was an anti-Zionist synagogue in Chicago, one of the most prominent ones in the country. One out of 30, but the most prominent one. The lead rabbi was retaliated against and removed from the board of rabbis in Chicago for opposing genocide. So I want to ask you about your experience, because you've been, based on our conversation before, you've been organizing for decades for peace in the region. So can you explain like the retaliation you felt and what your thoughts overall? Like, you can take it in where you want regarding the rise of Ziofascism and how we can fight against it.
This is great, and I want to both first say thank you for having me on. I'm really very privileged to be in this group. And then I helped start JVP. Just to be clear, I'm not speaking for them officially, but I'm a hard anarchist lefty. So I'm just gonna, take this. We can agree to agree on a lot of this stuff. So there's some really good work being done on this in terms of this weird coming together, this fascist moment and Zionism. They're the same thing in a sense. Pankraz Mishra just wrote a book on this called The World After Gaza. It's not just, it's really good about Middle East, but it also starts relating it back to India, for example, and these kind of settler colonial projects. And that's where I get this from a strong contextual. I don't know about left. I'm whether you call me a Marxist, a communitarian, or anarchist, I try to figure out what's going on. And that's why JVP was just a mechanism for me. What can we do 27 years ago to try and forestall or avoid what is occurring now? So I feel like we're a failure because this is a time of genocide. And the idea of this, I mean, fascism is baked into the Zionist process because it came out of exactly the same historical moment in Europe. It is exactly the same ethno-supremacist sensibility. Most people in the US don't understand the left. That's on purpose. There's been a huge destruction of left positions for God knows how long, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, since the New Deal. There's always been pushback. So this is all by way of saying Israel's a symptom of that, as far as I'm concerned. They dropped on the heads of the people of that land by virtue of the machinations of the world powers, the empires, the global north. And that's what we're seeing, exactly how it's played out. But we have smartphones now. So it's really, we say, were the Nazis worse? We don't know. I don't know if there's a bottom effect or floor effect to what we're seeing. And we're all put in this situation, anyone that's paying attention with a soul of any kind, of just being traumatized on a daily basis. And so this example of empire, I think it's going to be fundamental. I think there's going to be a huge shift in world alignment in that sense, because it's even gone beyond my expectations. And if you knew me, I'm not the most optimistic person in that respect. And I, on a daily basis, am traumatized by this. And to give you a sense of Jewish Voice for Peace in that regard, they're now anti-Zionist circa 2019. But they're not necessarily left, all of them. There is a great tradition of the Bund European left that we're trying to, the Jewish Bund, trying to reprise. It's very initial stages, but the problem is they were mostly killed during the Nazi times, and also pogroms throughout Western Russia, Soviet Union. And so we don't have that representation now, that hard left. And we're trying to reinstall that. And there just isn't that much of that. Like you talk about, like 1% of, I didn't know it was that high, or some of anti-Zionist synagogues. How many real lefties are in the U.S.? I mean, so to even hold the context of a general left position, and then you have to sort of say, well, we really want anti-Zionists who are probably liberal in a lot of other ways, liberal, to be hard left, and most aren't. As I found, I'm trying to reinstitute that within Jewish Voice for Peace. Personally, that's my goal. I'm patient. But the story here is, I saw your the video yesterday. I loved it. It was
90-minute rant session, that therapy session. It was a therapy session essentially, but go ahead.
But I understand that, because current Judaism, that's exactly right. You can call anything, whether you call the black churches in the South or whatever, it's service to power. That's effectively what they are. And the religious aspects of it are practically non-existent. And with the really Orthodox Jewish synagogues, the really old-fashioned Orthodox, they're anti-Zionists in their blood. The greatest threat to ultra-Orthodox Eastern European Jews is Zionism. And it's always been the secret battle. And there's obviously now Orthodox nationalists and all this other stuff, but the deep Orthodox tradition soundly rejects Zionism for profound biblical reasons in the Torah for them. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And the fact that Jewish Voice for Peace right now, I think has, I don't know, 750,000 members and supporters, that's a good sign, but it doesn't mean they're left, right? And a lot of people haven't really thought through what being anti-Zionist is. In my own history, as you can imagine, I had, pretty close family members when I was doing work in the West Bank wish that the IDF beat me up and arrested me and threw me out of the country. So, and by the way, I'm sure other people here too have experienced this. You just sort of lose friends now. And it's not even a choice for me. I just can't. Akkad's book sort of got to that point. One day everyone will have always been against this. You just say it's an emotional thing. You just can't be around people who either are indifferent to or supportive of genocide because you're around people that have no moral, floor. And so that's happened as well. And one of the reasons Jewish Voice for Peace, to the extent we care about Jewish Voice for Peace at all, a lot of it provides a certain kind of a certain place to feel comfortable-ish with others. Because when we started with 10 people, we were trying to make it a place where alienated, disenfranchised, or even disappointed Zionist Jews could find a place. And that was the first group I ever worked with that was Jewish. I'd worked with left Palestinian groups and others for years and years and years. And I was the first anti-Zionist or non-Zionist involved. So that and I've heard myriad stories of people having to deal with this in their families. Almost everyone to a person keeps going. The family either cuts them off or they come up with some kind of accommodation. I think the people you're responding to are these kind of anti-Zionists. They're too triggered, so to speak, by any idea of a threat to Judaism, and they're just not. That says more about them.